sign-up sheets. One is a regular sign-up sheet, which we need for you to show that you participated in. Two, if you wish to speak, we were hoping that people would sign up. And on that topic, I'll just say that if you are part of a group, you might have one person in your group address any issues or questions you have. But I'm going to give it just a couple more minutes, and then we'll get started. So you can go back to talking amongst yourselves.
Say that. All the AT&T meetings I've gone to always have to say that. Otherwise, you won't be able to participate. This was a big joke.
I couldn't hear that, but
I'll rephrase.
the
Last meeting I attended with AT&T, they asked for minutes for like
thank you everyone for coming to this joint session of the Select Board and the Planning Commission to hear more about the proposed cell tower. And as I mentioned before, if you haven't already signed up, please do so outside. And we did create a sign-up sheet if you plan to speak, but I think we can probably control that if you haven't done so. I am bringing the Select Board meeting to order, and I invite Phil to bring his Planning Commission meeting to order by saying, I imagine you're bringing your meeting to order.
I'll call the Planning Commission meeting to order.
Excellent, thank you. And now we're in this session. We are going to try to make this as orderly as possible and hear from everybody and hear everybody's concerns. We have received some letters from folks in addition to what we're going to hear about tonight. And the first speaker will be Hunter Thompson from the Department of Public Service that will describe the process that goes into making this decision from the state's point of view, and then Will Dodge is here from DRM, and he'll be making the larger presentation. And I would like that if you've heard your question answered at any time, that you refrain from repeating your question so that we can make it through here. We're trying to do this in about 2 hours. If we feel that we have to limit the time, we will. I don't believe that that will be too much of a problem, but please try and condense your questions as best as possible for timing purposes. And after we have the 2 presentations, the members of the Select Board will ask questions and address the presenters, and then the members of the Planning Commission will ask their questions and address any issues. And also, I think Phil and I discussed that he may be able to also shed some light further on zoning. And following those questions, and I really want people to refrain from interrupting while we're going through that process, we will then come out to the audience and have your questions and concerns. After that, there's 2 possible outcomes. One is we might be able to vote on our opposition or support. Both boards could do that, and we could reach some consensus right away. Otherwise, we would have to probably meet again in a warned meeting in order to reach that decision. So we'll cross that path when we get to it. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Scott Murphy, who will introduce the presenters, if Scott's ready.
I'm ready. So Hunter Thompson is the Director of Telecommunication and Connectivity for the Department of Public Service. He's going to be zooming in. Take it. Well.
Hunter, 1 second. Go ahead, Hunter.
Can't hear. We can't hear. Yeah, but the audio up. Hold on.
Try again, Hunter.
So, Hunter Thompson, Director of Telecommunications and Connectivity of the Public Service Department. I'm joined here tonight with Jim Porter, Director of the Public Advocacy Division of the Public Service Department. And I guess I can go over really quickly how cell things happen in the state of Vermont. Well, there's 2 possible ways. One of those involves going through Act 250, and then there's the way that we're doing now, which involves going through Act 248A. Rather than go into the minute detail of how Act 248A works, I can toss in the chat a guide to the Public Service Department Act 248A, and it can be shared around and passed to people. It's a PDF on our website that goes into some detail about how the statute works and what happens. Ultimately, we get the petition from the citer. We go through a list of questions related to the tower siting, depending on what type of tower it is, whether it's a de minimis facility, a limited size and scope facility, or a full 248 petition. We answer a set of questions and we forward that recommendation on to the PUC. The PUC is actually body that issues a certificate of public good. We simply are a middleman and we review these petitions on their behalf. With that said, I also have a link to the opportunities for public participation with the PUC, and I'll drop that into the chat as well as the link to make a public comment once a petition is issued in with the PUC. We encourage folks to issue a public comment if they feel strongly about a cell tower siting, and we encourage town select boards, if they can come to a consensus, to file that with the PUC as part of the statute 248A does give way to a town consensus siting. If you want me to go into details on 248A, on how the process works, I can go into a little bit of a guide. Basically, 248A was put together to give the PSD input onto cell tower sites for the state of Vermont. It's ultimately up to PUC, which is a quasi-judicial board, on whether or not the CPD is issued, and to go through here, the Public Service Board establishes rules and procedures related to utility matters and issues around cell tower siting. I think that's really all I got as far as an introduction. I'll be able to answer the questions better rather than go through this whole standard. I don't even like reading it, so I don't think anyone would like me to read it out loud.
We're going to take questions. Hunter, you're going to stick around and we'll address any questions for Hunter as well as for Will. And Will, I think, Scott, if you want to turn it over.
Why don't you want to say
Yeah, why don't we just, folks can hear me okay?
And do you need the microphone somewhere closer to you?
Yeah.
Can everyone hear me okay with that?
Yeah, there it is.
Okay, okay, if you'll give me 1 second, I'm just going to try to make sure that folks at home can see this. Let's see. Hopefully that. There we go.
I think you're on mute, Will.
I am on mute. Does everyone at home hear me? Hunter, you can hear me and you can see the screen?
Yep, you can hear me now. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, everyone. My name is Will Dodge. I'm an attorney at Downs Rockland Martin in Burlington, Vermont, and I'm here representing AT&T. There are several people that are online tonight as well to answer some questions. That includes Jeffrey Delicali, who is with Centerline Communications and was one of the people that did the site acquisition work and does a lot of the work involved in the construction and the design. And then Sohail Usmani, who is a radio frequency engineer who works at a company called C-Squared Engineering, which does an independent analysis of the radio frequency propagation and the overall function of the facility for these types of applications. So what I thought I would do tonight with this presentation, make sure that it's working okay. Hold on a second. Bear with me. First, talk a little bit about AT&T and FirstNet, which is which I'm going to explain is a public safety component of AT&T's network. We're going to talk a little bit about the reason for this site, which has to do with what's called radio frequency capacity, which is different from coverage, and I'll explain part of why that is. We'll do a description of the project. I'll talk very briefly about some of the visual impacts that we've assessed thus far with the project. Talk a little bit about the alternatives that we considered as part of this particular project, both before and after we filed the advance notice. Talk a little bit about an idea that we have for mitigation, and then I'll sort of reiterate very briefly some of what Hunter said regarding the Section 248A process. And what we're looking for at the end of the day is, prior to us going to the Public Utility Commission with an actual petition, we're asking that the town, through the Select Board and the Planning Commission, issue a recommendation. And the way that I always put this is, it could be a positive recommendation, it could be a conditional recommendation where you say, we're okay with the project, but we have the following concerns that we want AT&T to address. It could be a negative recommendation, in which case the burden falls to us to explain why maybe we can't comply or haven't been able to find another alternative. It could, in theory, be no recommendation at all and just let the process go from the point at which we file a petition. We wouldn't recommend that because we think at the end of the day, it's better that your voice be heard by the Public Utility Commission and that we at least have the opportunity to take it into account, even if you ultimately either oppose or have concerns about the project. And it's our job to really try to build some trust with the town. So with that, I think we'll start talking a little bit about this particular site, which is being built in combination with a whole slew of sites since 2017 as part of what's called FirstNet. So in 2001, one of the major issues that emerged in the communications world on 9/11 was the fact that while this national emergency was taking place, folks in fire departments couldn't speak with police departments couldn't speak with National Guard couldn't communicate properly with emergency service, etc. And there was a realization that there really needed to be a nationwide communication systems for public safety and first responders in the event of an emergency. It took many years to finally create a federal agency that was in charge of implementing this, what's called the National Broadband Safety Network, it's referred to often as FirstNet. And what the federal government realized in 2012 is that they were not going to be able to build a nationwide network on their own. So they put out the whole system to bid. Verizon, AT&T, and other companies all bid on it, trying to say, look, we will take our existing networks, cellular networks, that are focused on data, we will build those out, but we're also going to give you priority service for first responders, so that in the event of an emergency, basically a whole segment of the radio spectrum is reserved just for police, fire, utilities, etc. In 2017, AT&T was awarded the contract, and since then AT&T has been working to both combine their own assets to build out the network with a combination of money from the federal government. This particular site in Manchester is really an extension of plans that AT&T had privately. So it's not what's called a FirstNet designated site, but it's being built in combination with a bunch of other sites throughout the state. And just, I'm going to show you quickly, if I can, a short, actually, I think today, because we don't have much time, I'm going to make sure that in this presentation, which I'm going to make available, there's a short film that's a little bit about FirstNet and specifically the issue of capacity that I'm going to get into. So I think in the interest of time with all these folks online that we'll skip that. But just to say, an obvious question is, well, who's really using FirstNet? And statewide, you can see that there are some state agencies like VTrans, the Vermont State Police, Department of Health, the Agency of Natural Resources, National Guard, and locally there are a lot of subscribed FirstNet users, including the Sheriff's Department here in Bennington County, Manchester Medical Center, the Pownell Rescue Squad. So it really goes from even individual public safety users all the way up to state agencies and bigger companies like Velco and Green Mountain Power. And you can see that over the course, really since 2018, we have built or put online a whole slew of sites throughout the state, including 2 in Shaftesbury, 1 over in Woodford, several others in Bennington County, and we still have a few left to go, but most of them are either built or on their way to that stage. So why Manchester? What's the specific issue? Because a lot of you have said, and I've even seen it in the comments, well, I have cell service in downtown Manchester today. Why are you trying to build a tower near Depot Street? And the answer has to do with capacity. So this is a little bit of a confusing map, but if you get oriented with me, you'll see that you've got Route 7 here, and you've got Route 11 and Route 30, so basically the neighborhood that we're in now. And what this is showing in different colors is where your cell service for AT&T is coming from today. And that includes most of it coming from the tower over on Beckley Street, which is a 185-foot tower. Another one in Peru, an 140-foot tower, and actually 2 in Dorset. So really there's only 1 tower that AT&T has in Manchester proper. The rest of the service is coming from sites that are basically 4 to 7 miles away. And the issue that we're having, and the reason that and you can kind of see where some of those adjacent sites are located. Right, there's Beckley Street right there. Here are the ones up in Dorset. The one over here is in Peru, and the others are basically too far to be providing service. The issue is that Highway 7A serves 4,500 vehicles a day, and State Highway 3011, or Depot Street, has roughly 10,000 vehicles per day. And that measurement is just based on averages. So there's times of the year, especially the summer, Christmas, holidays, where the traffic on that road is so great and everyone is trying to use their phones. So even though you might see that you have service, the effect is your phone's not working. It'll be spooling, or you won't be able to send a text. And when that happens, not just for intended users, but for first responders, that's a big problem. So what we're hoping to do with the proposed site on Side Road is basically alleviate some of that traffic by having a site closer to where people are and designed to ultimately offload those other sites. So everywhere where you see green on this map, that's the coverage that's the essential coverage focus of the area. It's not so much that the coverage is new, although there's a little bit of that, and I'll show that, but it's essentially trying to alleviate the issues with the adjacent cell sites, or what we refer to in the industry as capacity. And we're certain that this will have an effect. It'll improve coverage, like I'm noticing here in the library, as maybe some of you are if you're AT&T customers. I have 1 bar. You'll have much better coverage locally once there's a tower in the area, but the most important part of it is really that capacity issue that I was referring to. So the proposed site is just off of Riverside Heights on Side Road on the Door property. And what I wanted to point out about that particular property, this is just a Google Earth map of it. You can see that this is the location on an ortho photo of the proposed cell site. And essentially this property, the Door property, has 2 characteristics to it. Up on the northern part, it has some modular homes, especially going around Side Road. And then on the bottom half of the property, it basically has a combination of portalets that are stored there, as well as a bunch of, and I think you can see them a little bit better, trailer cars, etc., as well as the Monarch Auto Body Shop. So the tower is proposed to be right here. There is a band of trees separating those 2 parts of the property. And another important feature that I wanted to show right from the get-go is that under your ordinance, and this is something that we always look at closely and try to comply with out of the gate, but the issue that we have is that telecommunications towers and associated equipment are not supposed to be on undevelopable land, which includes land where there'd be some sort of prohibition through Agency of Natural Resources, or else otherwise from a construction point of view you can't use. Cannot be in historic districts, we've tried to stay clear of those. Cannot be in residential zoning districts as defined in this ordinance, so I'll get back to that. Within 300 feet of any residence, and then within the approach or departure routes of basically the patterns of the airport, which we know we don't. This is not a site where we would be located so close to an airport that the tower would need to be lit. But what you'll notice about this is this industrial, the OI district, the Office Industrial District right here. The Door property is in the R10 district, so just using my pointer, there's our property. And you can see that it's very close to that OI district. And that's something that we've taken into consideration. The issue, and this is coming from the tax map, has to do with the fact that virtually all of the industrial district is in the 100-year floodplain, at least for a place where we can make the tower work. And so what we've tried to do is find a location that is close, but that ultimately stays out of that floodplain. You can also see over here a little bit clearer, like the Riverbend Partners property, which I'm going to come back to. It's in the OI district. It's all floodplain, and the only properties that are not in the flood district are actually very close to a lot of other residential. So the problem is that we're constrained in this area. The site itself really involves just using an existing access road. There's a 50 by 50 fenced area. We're staying out of the wetland boundary, out of the existing wetland buffer, out of the existing river corridor. And you'll see later that A&R has validated that our statements regarding this particular location. And then you've got the 140-foot tower as proposed now. The utilities will basically just come in off of this existing right-of-way. Here's a profile of the tower. You can see that it has a fenced compound around it, and it has a standard antenna array that usually has between 6 and 9 antennas on top of it. The antennas don't peak above the top, so nothing is exceeding 140 feet in height. So that's at least some idea about the facility itself. I think what people are often interested in talking about are the visual components. And unfortunately with the Zoom, let me just see if I can adjust this. So that's going to be a little bit better. What we do in order to assess the visual impact of a facility is a view shed analysis where you basically, these different colors here represent which parts of the tower you're going to be able to see. So you see that if it's yellow, you might see the very top of the tower. And that could, in theory, be 2 inches of that tower. It could be, the upper 10 feet. But then when you go to red down below, that's where you can see the complete tower. What we determined is that within a 2-mile range, you can see the tower from approximately 48 acres at 140 feet. And within a 1-mile range, it's approximately 32.5 acres. So again, even like down further south of the site, you may be able to actually see it. It's really only when you measure with photo simulations that you can determine exactly what degree. And those simulations, as I think a lot of you know, are created by suspending a balloon in the air at the 140-foot height, where the bottom of the balloon is at 140, and then taking pictures using the correct lens to try to validate what it's going to look like. So when we did that, what we noticed is that there's a lot of places in town that you won't be able to see it. The locus of where you will be able to see it is really along the Route 11, Route 30, along Depot Street. So we made a couple of simulations there. This is looking at it from north to south. Same thing from Depot Street. This is again at 140 feet. This is a little bit further down off of Ridgeville Road. This is from the Spruce Brook Apartments. As you can see, it's going to be more visible in winter than it's going to be at other times of the year. And this is again from Depot Street. This is from much further down on Ridgeville Road. Very hard to see unless you know exactly what you're looking for. And bear in mind, again, this is 140 feet. And this is really coming off of the exit, looking down. And basically, unless you know exactly what you're looking for, it's going to be difficult to see it at that particular location. Now, one of the...
I don't want to interrupt, but on Zoom, we're not seeing anything that you're showing on the screen.
Okay. Well, we're going to make the presentation available for everyone to access when it's done on that same project website. So I suggest that with the technology, it looked like it was sharing, but for some reason maybe you're not seeing it. It's saying that the screen is shared, but
it's not, the slides are not advancing with you.
let's see.
We're still on the landing page.
Okay, well I apologize for that. Again, we will make the presentation available. I'm going to try to get through the presentation just because I know there's a lot of people who want to talk. But I think the simulations themselves, if you want to see them, are on the project's website that we included with the advanced notice. So, and this is sort of a selection of pictures of where you can't, or where we confirm that you would not be able to see it. Sure.
Go back and kind of gloss over it real quick.
Yep. Yes, these are both from Route 30, and these were ones that were actually taken not by our specialists, but by others, but we were able to create simulations from them. And we're obviously seeing that at 140 feet. And I believe that these ones are also on the website, but if not, we'll have them on by tomorrow. So again, these are areas in the surrounding areas further away from Depot Street where we confirm that you won't have visibility. So another obvious question that always comes in this process is what other places would you consider, right? So we provided a list of some of them as well as the reasons that ultimately we decided that they wouldn't work. And that's a variation, but just to say, we started off trying to see if we could do this being as far away as possible up on Skyline Drive, where there's some existing communications facilities, but it's just too far away. And what we found in coming down through this list, right, going to Shaw's, looking at Dana Thompson Park, and specifically potentially replacing some of the larger light poles, is that it just would not penetrate down into the area of Depot Street that we need. Monarch, we looked at a few different places on the Door property itself, and obviously some of that was environmental constraints. We actually looked at this library as a possibility, and we also looked at some gravel pits that are off of Route 7 on Shed Road. We looked at the Riley Bridge, which was a possibility, but it just does not have the same impact. And then we also looked at places like the Rural Agricultural Zone, the Forest Conservation Zone, and came down to one that I think we were most serious about, which is a property in the Industrial District. It's that Riverside Properties location that I was showing earlier. And what you'll see is, basically here is our proposed site. This is on the eastern edge of the Door property. We looked at a property over by the Earth and Sea Fish Market. And that would be in the Industrial District. However, what we found was that, first of all, the visual impact is roughly equivalent, so it would be 26.8 acres of visibility total. But what we noticed is that just by moving it, the site would suddenly become much more visible in this area of Route 7 coming off of Depot Street. And that was something that specifically, in speaking with the town planner, we were advised. There's a lot of sensitivity about that particular area, that there was a whole project involving utility lines that needed to be buried. So that's part of the reason that the Dowling property will not work well. But the other issue is simply that in this location, there's a lot of transmission lines, distribution lines, and we were not able to confirm with A&R that the property isn't in the floodplain. So that would be a site qualifying as undevelopable as far as A&R is concerned, and we can't get a CPG without A&R approval. So what could we propose for mitigation? So one of the things that we thought about, including after seeing some of the photo simulations from Depot Street, was whether we could ultimately lower the height of the tower. And we understand, and we received a lot of comments about the 130-foot height limitation in the zoning ordinance. We picked 140 typically because that's what's in section 248A as a project of limited size and scope. But we understand that there was a concern about the 130. We looked at going to 100 feet in light of the concerns that were expressed. And what that does in terms of visibility is it brings it down to 13 acres from 32. So that's a way that we could still make the facility work, make it much less visible for most of those locations. There is a side effect to that in doing that, and I want to explain it so that it's clear. The issue would be, even though we've got coverage in the area, there are some portions of the town that would benefit from new coverage if we had the height up at 140 feet. Particularly, I would say, down in the village and along a couple of neighborhoods in this portion near Canterbury Road, up on that part of 7A. You can see it a little more clearly where it says incremental coverage. You can see that there's turquoise areas. Those are areas that there's not reliable AT&T coverage today, that there would be AT&T coverage at 140. But again, looking at ultimately what we're trying to use this site to handle, which is the traffic demands, we can make it work at 100 feet. So beyond that, and I realize I've spoken a lot, and I know there's a lot of people who probably have questions and want to talk, but just as a reminder, under section 248A, the select board and the planning commission can make a recommendation based on land conservation measures in the region, in their town plan, as well as items in the zoning ordinance. And the board, the Public Utility Commission, will give substantial deference to those recommendations unless good cause is shown to do otherwise, and that would be our burden to show. As we read your town plan, it recognizes the importance of better wireless, but it makes an emphasis on good screening and mitigation. And then in the land use and development ordinance, we comply with a lot of the provisions, but not all of them perfectly. And I would submit to you that part of it is this weird dual character of the Door property, in that if somebody was looking at it today, it's pretty hard to call that bottom half of it a residential property. It has much more of the characteristics of all those properties in the industrial district. And one of the things that the Public Utility Commission has said before is you look at the character of what's there, not just looking at the districts, the zoning districts in a vacuum. In terms of health concerns, we've done a calculation and can confirm that we comply with the federal guidelines on radio frequency emissions, which is what's mentioned in the zoning ordinance. And then in terms of natural resource impacts, we have this email from Kathleen Taft, who's one of the reviewers at A&R, who confirms that there's no concern regarding public water systems, source protection areas, floodway, river corridor, fisheries, wetlands, wildlife, and what they're still looking at is their solid waste program. But those core environmental concerns, they're in agreement with us that we stay out of those sensitive areas. So I will post tonight's presentation on the project website tomorrow so that folks can access it. And I will also include the link to the YouTube movie that I wanted to show that explains a lot about capacity and the importance of that as far as not just our own enjoyment of using cell sites or using our cell technology, but especially for public safety. So with that, I'll stop the share.
Will, I just want to check with Greg Sukenik, who may be here. Were those links in that digital article from yesterday?
They are, and we'll make sure that those links are published on the website.
So for folks on Zoom who didn't see that presentation, there's a, on the Manchester Journal Facebook page, and I believe,
Facebook page too, sure.
and on manchesterjournal.com, there's an article about this meeting with the links that were just mentioned. So that will help you. And I'm going to have the boards ask questions first, starting with the select board before we open it up to the audience. And again, I just want to remind everybody that if you hear your concern or question answered, please let's try and keep it from becoming repetitive. And I will turn it, I will see if anybody here has a question, and I'll start with you guys before anyone?
You mentioned that you could go down to 100 feet. Can you go anywhere in between 140 and 150?
Can't hear you.
I'll repeat the questions. The question is, you mentioned that you can go down to 100 feet. Can you go incrementally from 140 to 100?
We could go down to really at any 10-foot interval. And here's why it's a great question. Part of what happens in wireless technology is that if you have multiple carriers, each one needs to be separated from the next one by 10 feet. So if AT&T, let's say, puts its antennas, the antennas are usually 8 feet. So if they are if we have a 100-foot tower and we're at our center line is at 96 feet, then the next party who would be above us would be at 106 feet, etc., all the way up to, let's say, 130. I think that we're comfortable right now going to 100 feet and thinking that that will work for the immediate needs that we have. The tower will have more capacity if we build it to 120, but the other way to do, so in other words, it'll be much easier for another carrier, let's say a Verizon or a T-Mobile, to come and put on if that extra 20-foot section is already built. But we could simply add it later. And it does seem like, just based on the overall tenor of the comments that we've suggested, that that might be the better way to go.
I'm wondering if you can talk about the, kind of the compensation that as proposed? And then I also am curious, you were just talking about adding tenants to the towers. You said there's going to maybe be 6 to 9 things on the top. Would these be in addition to that? And how does that work just for the whole overall lease or how?
Right, so let me answer the second question
Could you
first.
repeat the question, please?
The question is about lease expense, or how much one of these generates, number one, and also leasing out additional antennas, and how many could there possibly be?
Right, so it's the second question first. Typically, each carrier will have 6 to 9 antennas on that, around that 10-foot, whatever that interval is going to be. So in other words, if you, in theory, if AT&T has 6 and you added 2 more carriers, you could end up with, 18. It really is just going to be dependent on the sort of the specific needs that each network provider has in a given instance. As far as but the idea is, and your ordinance encourages it, you want to have a structure that's at least capable of accommodating more, because what that means is you get less towers at the end of the day than if you just let everyone build their own tower, right? You'll have what we call tower proliferation. As far as the rent goes, we don't disclose that just because it's really between us and the landlords. But it's certainly a market rent, and I think that no one. I think that the state of Vermont has similar sort of guidelines in terms of rental. I can share those with you just to give you some idea, but it's certainly in line with that level of compensation.
Thank you.
Lloyd?
So, interestingly,
Yeah, speak up.
You're not,
Why don't you just use the microphone?
yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't-
Out of practice. Interestingly, the community that has spoken so far has talked mostly about health concerns versus the visibility. So I'm surprised that there's very little on the slideshow about the health piece, other than just complying with federal regulations. Additionally, there was an image in the slideshow that was my driveway. And now I've seen it, because I missed the balloon and how it would look, impact the residential area around my home. And it is definitely, in my opinion, it's too tall. I mean, it's large, it's an eyesore. I'm very shocked, actually, at how it looks in all of those images. But I think if you have more information about the health concerns, I feel like a lot of people in the audience would like to hear more about that part than the visual piece.
Sure. What I could say, so first of all, thank you for those comments, and I understand what you're saying, and that's, I think, in part, not just because of you, but because of a lot of the feedback that we did receive in different corners, that we thought about reducing the height down to 100 feet, because it really does, for most locations, make it go either into the trees or below roof lines from most of Depot Street and from other areas. And if it's a question of doing an additional balloon test, that is something that we've sometimes done, if there's questions about that, so that might be something that we could talk about. In terms of the health impacts, I think what I would say about that is, first of all, the federal government has said, and it's in the Telecommunications Act, that is sort of the exclusive province of the federal government, except that a carrier like an AT&T or a Verizon is required or can be asked to at least show proof of compliance with those, what's called the maximum permissible exposure limit. But what I'll say further about that is that, so the MPE is kind of like a maximum safety range where non-ionizing radio frequency emissions pose a risk to human health. Most of those were based on standards that were established in 1996 and have been tested again and again and again. And they've never been changed by the FCC after being reviewed by Department of Health, Department of Agriculture. Interestingly, and I think Hunter could attest to this, the Vermont Department of Health, among some other states, have also taken their own look and said, yes, this is the correct standard. And what it shows for virtually any type of conventional cell tower site like this is that the maximum that you would ever get between the safety threshold and all of those antennas working at their maximum peak. So Christmas in Manchester, everyone is here to celebrate, everyone is trying to meet up with everybody else, take videos, post things. When those antennas are all basically on overload, the maximum that you ever get to, on that chart I showed, it was 0.01%. But if we bring the height down, I would say you'd be lucky to see more than 5% on that. So it's orders of magnitude lower than the MPE. Where these applications become more important are for what are called rooftop sites. So if you had a very tall building in Manchester and somebody was going up on the roof, there have to be safety measures if you're like literally walking right in front of the antenna. But that doesn't happen with cell towers. The only people that work on cell tower antennas are people who know what they're doing and go in with cherry pickers and know how to deal with RF.
You all set? Well, I have a couple of questions. One, I noticed on the map that the state provides of where these are located and then who's actually on the tower, that there were several repeaters, I call them repeaters, which I guess connect from the main tower. And I know that a constituent got in touch with me, actually it was Tim Waker. Tim said that he has a test phone from Verizon, and he basically is covered like a rug in this area. And Verizon has their main tower is the one I think right in town that you can see, which is, I don't know if anybody's looked, but pretty much littered with other antennas. So if we're talking about health, that might be an area to focus on a little bit. But one thing you also see is, I believe it's a repeater on top of a telephone pole on Main Street near Worvis, and up on a hut up on the top of Bromley, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Why isn't that a possibility for this particular application in order for both usage and also to get the 911?
It's a possibility that we looked at.
Yeah.
The issue is that it doesn't have, when the volume is too great, even those little repeaters can get overloaded, or you just need a lot more of them. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I guess we took away from both our conversations with the planners and looking at the ordinance is that if the town had its druthers, there would be a lot of what are today overhead utility lines that would be undergrounded.
Right.
And obviously with small cells, what happens is, they're called small cells because they're not exactly repeaters. They're basically like very small nodes that will help with those capacity and traffic issues for like 1/10 of a mile. But the issue is that they almost always need your poles to go up. So the net effect of using utility poles is that you may have taller poles in places where you don't necessarily want them, and that's particularly true where you've got somewhere like Depot Street that I think, my sense is that it's really undergoing lots of sort of streetscaping to improve it.
Right. Yeah. Is Verizon part of that same
FirstNet?
FirstNet?
No, they have their own public safety system that works, but it's not quite the same as FirstNet. So they still have capabilities, but this, like I said, those agencies, the sheriff, etc., they're all using FirstNet.
I'm sorry, I'm going to take up a little more time. If you are higher, are you extending your reach? So if you were to place a much taller tower in a different location, could you extend the reach to where you want to get to where you want to go?
I'm going to ask my colleague Sohail Usmani if he wants to answer that question.
And just unmute yourself, and hopefully we can all hear you.
And that's the engineer, correct?
Correct.
You see there? I'm just looking.
Should be there. Sohail, are you on? Let me text him.
He may have already noticed things are starting to get unruly, and he took off. They're not unruly. You guys, by the way, thank you very much for your patience as we go through the process. While we,
Maybe while we're waiting for.
while we
him-
try and find him,
Yeah.
I'm going to turn it over to Phil and your questions. And I'm going to give you this microphone
I got it. I had a question.
because everybody can hear you. And I think you can turn it on and off too. You said he's muted. I'll try and unmute him because I have the power.
Hey, Will, Leon, Ward Planning Commission. I have a question for you. You mentioned you have one tower here in town, that's AT&T, and two in Dorset.
Correct.
The tower you have here in town, do you guys own that tower or do you pay rent for it?
We pay rent. We
So
pay rent
if
to
you built this other tower, you wouldn't have to pay rent, is that correct? Because you own the tower, you would just pay to the landlord?
So we would pay the landlord. We would own the tower more than likely very briefly and then sell it. So AT&T is not in the business, as paradoxical as it sounds, of owning a lot of towers. They much prefer to have third-party companies, tower companies, like Insight, who owns the one here in town, SBA, Crown Castle, a lot of the ones who owns in Dorset Street, ultimately own it and manage it.
Because of upkeep, is that correct? Is that why it's easier?
Yeah, it's just that AT&T's business is really about making the service work, whereas a tower company, okay, wants to get more people.
Would it be more profitable for you in the long run to build your own tower and then sell it than to keep paying rent for the other tower? Or would you continue the other tower?
No, we'd stay on the other tower, absolutely. Yeah, no, this is definitely not a swap locations because of high rent.
Okay.
It was hard to see on the map, but is this site, is it directly abutting an office industrial lot? Or are there lots in between that are still not office industrial?
I believe it is abutting the office industrial. What's tricky about it is you've got the railroad and you've got the river right there. And I didn't mention the railroad, but that's the other potential issue is between railroads and utilities. There are like setbacks on top of setbacks. So that's why when we were looking at the Riverside Properties location, we were like, how are we ever going to make this work? There's just not enough room. Plus it's in the floodplain, or at least we couldn't confirm that it was not.
Thank you.
So the other sites that you considered, besides Side Road, I would imagine that some of those would be compliant, or they would be possible sites because you're talking about public safety, right? You're not talking about coverage on a particular road or in a particular area.
Well, you are. In other words, you want your phone to function, especially for public safety users, when they're in their vehicles, right? In fact, that's not only when they're in their vehicles, when they're in their buildings or when they're outside. So roads are definitely part of the equation. They're just not the exclusive part of the equation. And as far as the other properties, the reasons that they were rejected were all different. Sometimes it would be because a landowner said, no, not interested in renting my land. Other times it might be because we look at it and say, that's going to be terrible. You're going to be able to see that from everywhere in town. Let's not bother. Sometimes it could be an environmental concern, and very often it was simply that our engineers look at it and say, that's not going to do the trick, or it's not going to do it nearly as well as being closer to Depot Street.
Thank you.
Is that,
Yes, that's
there.
my engineer. So Hale, do you want to take a stab at answering the question about whether a larger tower further away would do a comparable or better job? I think that's, if that's...
I think the question was, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
yes.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and Board. Sohail Usmani, for the record. I work for C-Square Systems and hired to represent AT&T. So the answer to the question is, short answer is the area can be covered with a very tall site, not in the near vicinity, but because of capacity issues, as Will Dodge mentioned and he explained really nicely, that the site needs to be where the search rate was drawn due to the capacity issues. If it was just a coverage site and there was coverage gap in this area, then the argument can be made,
why put a tower here? Why don't we put it somewhere farther higher up on a higher elevation? So because it's very precise location for this particular need, that's why the ring was drawn where it was, and the site was chosen where it is.
Okay, great. We're going to open the questions to you guys, and what I'll do is I think we'll pass the microphone around.
It's going to walk around.
Yeah, okay, good. And I'll give that to you. There is a button on it that makes sure that you see a green light. Ed, and by the way, thank you, Ed, for setting up and making this space available to us and Manchester Community Library.
Well, we're delighted to host you guys tonight, and I have a second mic, so I can come around for folks.
So we'll go back and forth between the audience here and the folks online. There are about 28 people online, and total audience number is about 70 of us. I hope, again, if you've heard the answer to your question, you'll refrain from repeating it. And so raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question, and Ed will come on over. And Bill is behind you, coming with a mic.
You went through your alternative sites rather quickly, and so I'd like to dwell on a couple of those that I don't understand really why they're rejected, or they just aren't quite as good as it's convenient. And also, I didn't hear, or I didn't see anything about what we refer to as the old airport site, which I think has, well, would have possibility, but is also beneficial, is that the town owns that property, and then they could be beneficiaries of potential revenue. So was that site looked at all?
I don't believe so, because I will just confess, I do not know where the old airport is. So that's something we're looking at.
And it's off of Richville Road, slightly south of
So is it in the floodplain though? That's the issue?
No.
Okay.
No,
So then
not
that's,
the
my concern is that, and I appreciate the question, and as AT&T typically does after these types of meetings, if suggestions come up that are viable, or even if they're not viable, we'll look into whether they're, it's a possibility. I think that the reason that we probably didn't look at it was, again, because we started to see that the way that the OI district is drawn, as you get further away from the Battenkill and further away from Depot Street, you end up closer to other residential neighborhoods that are right on it. And that's not, that's by no means unique to Manchester.
Let's say my assessment of that site is you're fairly well isolated. It minimizes your view shed issue. You are close to the Battenkill. You still have good line of sight up and down the valley.
Okay, we'll take a look.
Okay. Then the second question is, why was the area around Riley Rink and the gravel pit, why didn't that meet your criteria?
It really was that, and we actually went and double checked on that one, and the second time around, our engineer said, I was on the fence about it, but compared to what we get from being right, on basically south of Depot Street, we know we can't go north of it or immediately north of it because that's the historic district, right? We don't want to be in the historic district. I was noticing that substation along Depot Street when I came in today, and I was like, I suppose we could decide to go there, but no one would be pleased. So the thing about the rink that was a possibility is, well, it's north and it's a higher elevation. But the other issue is that there's a bunch of trees around there too, and so we'd be concerned that it just doesn't seem to get in according to the engineers.
If it's the trees are 50 foot high, and
right, but you're up at a higher elevation, so it still has an effect to some degree.
And then this is a question to the town. Have we had any input from our first responders here, the fire, the police, and rescue, and so on? To what degree has their communication suffered? Do you have any feedback on that or issues because we don't have this upgraded service.
I'm going to send that over to Scott if he has any idea, and if not,
I don't.
I'll, even though he's recused himself, I'll ask Ivan if he has anything to add to that particular.
That might require some further in-depth.
I know that we have done some work on their radios, and we've purchased a lot of new equipment recently, and I have not heard of any issues right now but I think this is a little bit different, compared to what they're actually using just for inter-department communications. Right.
And that's my perception too, that they have fantastic cross-communication between the different services. And then a related question is, if this tower goes in, do all the responders have to convert their phones to AT&T service?
No, it's completely voluntary. So in other words, just as I was explaining before, a first responder in Manchester Police could decide, or we want to go with Verizon, not First. But the trend has been that more and more local, regional, and statewide public agencies have been using FirstNet. And part of it is because that expansion that I showed at the beginning of all the new sites that have come online, that's had an effect. And even the Department of Public Service, when they did their survey, said AT&T has the most coverage within Vermont.
But again, to be clear, first responders would only be able to, let's say, participate or take advantage of whatever this network may provide if they have AT&T.
Well, if they're, no, in fact, it's if they're FirstNet subscribers specifically.
FirstNet.
Yeah, yeah, which is almost like a different, it's like almost a separate business that AT&T runs in coordination with the federal FirstNet authority.
So those were my questions, here's a couple comments. Your balloon sighting issue, I don't know what the size of it, it appears to be maybe it's a 2-foot diameter balloon at best. Correct me if I'm wrong, and you can see that in your slides. That's no comparison to the 10-foot diameter cell ring that you have in these towers, and all your representations only show one right now. But potentially, when another person takes that over, a firm takes it over, there could be 4, 5, 6 rings on there, just like there is the current cell tower off of Berkeley Street. And when you look at that, that creates a dense mess. You don't have the vision of a tower. You have a very dense, wide objects sticking up into the sky, whatever height you decide to put it at. And the problem with this current location is in almost the lowest spot in town. And I've driven around town, and every elevation I'm on, Depot Street, coming into town, coming off of Barnville Road, or coming into town in all different directions, you're going to see that tower. And you're going to see it against the backdrop of our mountains on each side. And I think that's an atrocious intrusion on our visual. We were very careful in our zoning bylaw to restrict building heights. And I think our max in all conditions, and you can correct me, I think it's 40 feet. And so I think this tower in the center of town is really creating undesirable intrusion on what we've worked so hard to protect as our visual background of our community. Thank you.
I just want to tell everybody there's about 16 folks who have signed up to speak, and if you'd like, we'll go down that list, and also I'll try and bring folks in from Zoom. And I think based on that and trying to keep it in a timely manner, I'll think we'll do 3 minutes per person if possible. And again, if Bill just addressed your concern, please think about refraining from repeating it. And Larry, I think Larry Ed's got that microphone for you. We're going to start Larry in the minute he. There we go.
Well, First of all, I'd like to ask you, you're working for a lawyer's firm, and you're considered a lobbyist, that's what I would consider you, because you're trying to get this tower for FirstNet, correct?
Well, this is a quasi-judicial, if I can answer your question.
Don't use the fancy words, because I'm as dumb as dirt.
No,
You are a lawyer.
but now
They are FirstNet, who's putting up the tower, okay? And AT&T is going to lease the tower spot off of you. Is that how it's going to work?
Not really. It's more that AT&T will build a tower with FirstNet capabilities and commercial.
Okay,
regular AT&T
who is going to build the tower?
AT&T.
They're the owners of the tower.
Correct.
You just said before that they're not owners of the tower.
They're going to own it until they sell it.
And then they go and they sell it.
Yeah,
And
they sell
the
it.
next person who buys it can put anything they want up there.
They'll still have to get permits. They'll
They-
still have to, and they still
Okay,
have
let me tell you a quick
to.
story, a quick story. A friend of mine comes to my house, he's an engineer. He brings over another friend for dinner. And while we were sitting there, we were talking, and I said, gee, what do you do for a living? He says, I go all around the country finding spots to put up towers. He says, that's what I do. He says, and the main thing we do is to get one cell on there, because the FCC says we have to have one cell. And once we get it, we sell it to anybody else, and we don't care what they do. Okay, so that's basically what you're doing. Call a tower. This is Vermont. Okay, these people aren't stupid, believe me. Okay, so they got the tower. Now we have a 140-foot tower. The building that's next to it, which is the Crystal Palace, is not a 100-foot building. Okay, it's probably about 75 feet. Okay, the second question is, what is the base size of this?
Usually ends up being about, within a compound.
Yeah, with the fence around it.
Let's see, Jeff, do you want to, oh, it's a 50 by 50 compound.
Okay.
And the structure at the bottom is slightly bigger than it is at the top. So at the top of the tower, it's roughly 3 feet, and down below at the base, it's roughly 6 feet.
Okay, so is there going to be a diesel generator there for in-house?
There'll be a diesel generator, although it could be a propane generator.
But there is going to be a
There'll be a
generator
generator,
to run it, okay?
So that when you're,
So
so
now
that
we
if there's
have-
a power blackout,
Excuse me?
so that if there's a power blackout, your phone will still work.
I understand how it works. I've built things in my life, I understand how it works.
And Larry, you have 15 seconds
So
left.
what the thing is that you are working for AT&T to get the approval as a lobbyist or lawyer, that's all you care about. And then once you get the approval, the doors on it, how long is the lease going to be for? Is it for perpetuity forever, or is it?
It's for a term of years, so
A term of
typical in the industry is 25 years.
Okay, now the last question I have, and I don't know if you know this, is every
Larry,
time that phone goes ding-a-ding-a-ding, how much do the doors get out of it?
Well, I think that question was asked earlier, and he can't disclose that. So, Scott.
But they do get money out of it.
Well,
The way I heard from Donnie on the other telephone call, one day he said to me, that's like a cash machine, every time it rings, I get money.
Well, again, I think that we're going to move on to Scott Buckner. Scott, are you? There you are.
Thanks. I'll be very brief. So, in all those pictures and all those things, I'm glad you spoke about your driveway. I'll just say, and maybe others will speak, but for my entire neighborhood, you don't show anything in our neighborhood. We are your neighbor. That is our view. That is our mountain that is going to be just basically destroyed the view by putting that tower. That red balloon, I looked at my deck and I looked at it several weeks ago. I didn't even know what it was. No one gave us any kind of notice. It's just because they had to give notice to one of my neighbors who owns the field behind me that we even found out about this. And, you know, I can guarantee all of our property values will be affected by that kind of a view. And what Bill said, the entire town. So you've got to find second best. That may be the best, but that shouldn't be put in the center of our town to ruin the view for everyone who's in that area, and particularly people in our neighborhood right next to it, where it is just a tremendous eyesore. It's just not right.
Thanks. Thank you, Scott. Dave Atchison. And if I butcher your name, I apologize. That one wasn't too hard.
You did perfect.
Thank you.
Atchison, thank you. I have just two main things, that are very brief. One, I like the idea that if it's a government network, that we don't have to have private money-making companies work on that. But that's out of our realm here, I understand. I do like the idea that there's a planning commission and a town governance that makes rules that we all voted on, that says certain size limits and historical districts and areas of town that we enjoy and like. And I think that overall, we should have that input to where anything goes. And it does not seem to make sense, like Scott says, where you say that there would be something in the middle, very close to the historical district. It does make more sense to me to be out at the airport, like Larry said. And the engineering technology, we all need cell phones, but let's put it kind of outside our community in a larger area that will service us, but doesn't sit in the middle of town. There is the residential industrial zone that we have that was created. We should use those so that we don't get into residents with not just cell towers, but with other industrial things through variances and whatnot. Somehow we have to separate ourselves from the providers of the service that do need to make money in the capitalistic world, but also to preserve the integrity of the town that we have. I've lived in this town just for less than a year, but I spent a lot of time in New England. Berkshire County was my last legal address. And every town now has a place they consider prime for development, prime for recreation, prime for, because there are a lot of us now that live around here, and we're bumping elbows. So we've got to really stay true to our maps without variances of stuff that we think is good to have. So a cell tower right in the middle of town, right next to the historic district, just doesn't sound right. And I'd like to put it back to the town representatives to not pull a variance and stick to the laws that have been created. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dave. David Libersich. Did I do that right? How was that? Did I get that? Close?
No questions.
No questions, thank you. Martine Victor.
Yeah.
And I appreciate everybody who's heard their answer. I think that it's working.
All right, thanks. I wrote this because it's just easier for me to do it that way. Manchester is a tourist destination known for its historic character, beautiful mountain views, upscale shopping, and outdoor recreational pursuits. AT&T's proposed cell tower would not enhance our town's attributes, but would diminish them. The cell tower would violate our town plan and land use ordinances designed to protect the town from exactly this type of intrusive industrial eyesore. And I have to say, Mr. Judge kind of skipped over the fact that this tower is in a residential zone, even though it is in close proximity to an industrial or whatever the other zone was called. The site would be within 300 feet of residences. It is near a daycare center, Here We Grow Preschool and Play School. It is approximately 800 feet from Equinox Terrace, an assisted living facility. It's close to Maple Street School and their outdoor classroom down by the river. The site is in a low-lying area within a 100-year floodplain, 250 feet from the west branch of the Bannock River. AT&T cell tower construction would entail a 50-foot cement pad, which you've described, and the construction itself threatens the Bannock with polluting sediment from the construction and potential leaks from the generator and diesel fuel or propane fuel tank. A safe setback from a cell tower is at a minimum 1,600 feet. AT&T chooses not to address the biological harm caused by cell tower antenna radio frequency RF radiation, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Tens of thousands of peer-reviewed studies show harmful biological effects from this type of radiation, well below the tissue-eating threshold set by the 1996 Telecommunications Act, which was never protective of health. Radiation is a fact, an invisible but measurable environmental toxin. AT&T created simulations of the cell tower to show how it would appear from various vantage points. It would be visible from most locations throughout Manchester. It is my understanding the tower would host multiple carriers, so it wouldn't remain with a single tier of antenna for long. Once in place, what other technologies would this tower host? 4G, 5G, 6G? It is important to acknowledge the economic necessity of good connectivity along with first responder safety issues. However, these issues must be weighed against the ensuing damage caused by a project of this magnitude in the proposed location. An alternative location must be identified. If possible, reduce the scope of this project, let AT&T meet its goal of improved coverage while minimizing environmental harm and visual impact.
Martina, I just want to let you know your 3 minutes are up, but you can,
Almost
if
done.
you can
Okay.
summarize.
It would be an unfortunate irony if by improving first responder communication, those forced to live and work near the cell tower suffered a more insidious kind of harm. Let's keep Vermont, Vermont. Don't, as to paraphrase Senator Leahy, don't turn Vermont into a pincushion. We ask our Select Board and Planning Commission to support the town in rejecting AT&T's proposed cell tower at 80 Side Road. There is clearly widespread opposition to it. It's a terrible location, and most people state that they have excellent cell phone reception, especially in the middle of Manchester. We have circulated a petition that now has more than 250 signatures, which is more than 5% of Manchester residents. In fact, we probably have another 30, but I don't think that person made it to the meeting tonight. We, the undersigned, are concerned citizens who urge the Town of Manchester Select Board and Planning Commission to reject this tower proposal and direct the AT&T to work with our community to find an acceptable alternative location that complies with our town plan and bylaws. Thank you.
Because you were speaking for so many, I allowed that to go over, and thank you. And so those people that signed the petition were able to get their 3 minutes. John Burnham from the NBA. John is in the back. Maybe you have to turn your computer a little bit, Will.
Hi, good evening. My name is John Burnham, I'm the Executive Director of the Manchester Business Association. And when this proposed cell tower was put out there in the news, we felt it was important to ask our 130 member businesses, the majority of them here in Manchester, a simple question, would you approve, yes or no, to the proposed cell tower? It was just a yes or no answer with optional reasons to why they answered that way. Out of the 37 respondents, which is about 30% of our total members, about 59% of them supported the building of a cell tower. 9 were no, so about 24% of those total respondents, and 6 were kind of didn't really care either way. But all were, the majority anyway, did have concerns as been expressed this evening. So I will say this: while the majority of respondents favor tower for improved communication service for our local residents, businesses, first responders, and visitors alike, the comments of those concerned in all of those various categories, the yes, no's, and the neutrals, had concerns about the height, which has been talked about, maybe something a little shorter. Location, is there better alternatives that have been considered? Aesthetics of the actual tower, whether it would be providing more broad sets of communication services other than the cell service, and of course the health concerns. And that's just what we're here to share, is our actual members' feedback and questions. I do have one question though that kind of arose, which is it going to be a 5G tower? And if not, can it be in the future by someone else?
You want to respond? So 5G is really is just a progression of technology. There's no proposed microwave antennas on the tower. It's only panelized antennas like you would see. Actually, I shouldn't say for sure, but I don't think that there's many microwave antennas over on the Beckley Street site, the one that's serving Manchester now. So it'd be similar panelized antennas to what you'll see at most cell towers.
Okay, thank you, John. Steve Berry. And Ed is right behind you with.
My concern is health. And also, I'd like to know, why is it that corporations choose to be in low-income areas, mostly, where the people do not gather and have voice that a lot of persons that otherwise would speak up, just remain silent. So why do we choose places where people don't have a voice to have cell towers? And what happens in terms of the Manchester community once people get sick? And what are the costs going to be once the radiation moves into the population and the people start trying to deal with their health care issues as they have in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and are dealing with that right now. And the Health Commission said it should change, but the town doesn't have any say anymore. And that's because Verizon has too much money and too many lawyers, and they cannot fight once the tower goes in. So they're stuck with it. So those are some of the concerns that I have, and I'd like to address it if you so kind.
So I'm going to take that, Steve, that you were expressing your concerns versus looking for an answer to some of that, because I'm certainly not qualified to answer that, but I think we all got the gist of what you were saying on that. And I don't have any studies that talk about what health issues are occurring under the current tower, for example. But it is in the area which you described. So, okay, Carol Berry, did you want to speak, or do you think you're all set? Okay, we're moving on. Mike Narath, are you here, Mike?
I am here.
There you are.
I'll pass at this point.
You'll pass, okay. Excellent, thanks everybody. I'm glad that, I think that this is working. Andrew MacArthur. Andrew.
I'm Andrew MacArthur. I'm here representing Travel Limited Southwestern Vermont chapter. For those who don't know, TU is a national organization with many local chapters. We focus on conservation, restoration, and protection of local resources, the water. We heard from members, so that's why we're here. I'm also here representing our aquatic neighbors, trout, fisheries, water health. I'm not as concerned about viewpoint, what it looks like. I'm more concerned about water health and quality. The West Branch is under pressure already. And it's got an obstruction upstream. It's called Mill Pond. That dam prevents spawning access upstream. Could be used to come out. Below Bagel Works, the river is a mess. My organization has taken out thousands of pounds of trash and debris, and we still just scratch the surface. I have two questions. The first being, what is the final setback between the West Branch of Batten Kill and the fence that creates the barrier at the site? Do you know what the final setback is?
I'll look it up. It's in here, and like I said, we had A&R bless that setback, and that's not something they always do.
Yeah, usually, yeah. Sometimes, so what the beauty of TU is we focus on watershed health and watershed viability, spawning habitat and restoration, without interest, without input from business, government, or other entities. We're volunteer organization. I work full-time and do this on the side. So we are speaking on behalf of the watershed, not anyone else. So I don't know what influenced that decision, but my second question has to do with riparian buffer and disruption to riparian buffer during construction. Construction can be messy, granted, like, I get it, it's messy. But what we're really concerned with is leaving that riparian buffer in place, especially at that property, because we know that property is a source of environmental pollution, and granted, it can be cleaned up, it's going to take years, and if you've ever waded through the West Branch of Bannock like I have, it's a sad sight. It makes you want to not trust in humanity anymore. I pulled 15 shopping carts out of, and I'm granted that it's not coming from the property itself. I'm going down a tangent, but
your time has expired.
Thank you.
But Andrew, I think I want to address your I do want Will to address your first question, and I really appreciate what you're saying, and I think it's good that somebody shares, I think, a lot of our concerns about the back. So it's nice to know you're there. Thank you. Did you have any number on that?
I don't have a number. What I have is, I know that A&R sets that corridor of what they consider the riparian buffer to be. And we also, AT&T has gone out of its way on many sites to stay out of that riparian. A, because it's more regulation, it means we have to do additional construction that we otherwise wouldn't have to do. But secondly, we certainly are trying to look for places that have less of an impact, and construction-wise, this has very little impact in terms of there's a road going in, there's utilities, no trees need to be cut. The limits of the construction when you put in a compound is basically just gravel. So once the foundation goes in, which is essentially like a 10 by 10 concrete block, and there's one other, there's not much more to it. With that said, I have asked my colleagues, and I think we could conceivably put some kind of plantings on the back side of the compound to maybe strengthen the buffer somewhat. I think we'd have to look into that. I can't say it for sure, but that's at least an idea that we consider doing.
Okay. Is this Bill again down here? Did I have him twice? Yeah. Okay. Novella?
That's me.
And Ed, Novella's, am I pronouncing your name correctly? The other thing is, I think it might be a good idea. I imagine everybody's from Manchester, but if you're not.
I retired from Verizon's CO Design Engineering outside in Westchester County. My office has moved around quite a bit, but having an engineering background, my concern was the way you just described how you protect the ground by decorating like the way Verizon cell towers have been done. If you go back to New York, certain parts that were built by Verizon are camouflaged. Very nice. You can't really tell if it's a tree or not a tree. But I am thank you for reminding me. But excuse me. But I'll make this short and sweet. My concern is being a subscriber of Verizon still. I still have cell phone problems of being disconnected. Why I don't know, but I'm still looking into it. But I'm concerned with the aesthetics. That's what my concern is, and the health factors. But it's all a question of how often people will be walking by or, peruse the parameters of Manchester, because this is a beautiful location to have a family and raise your kids up here and all that business. But there is some issues with the radiation that's going to be generated. That's my concern. So, but that's basically it.
Thank you, Novella. Mary, Ursula, did I do that right, Mary?
I think I'm too old for all of this. 26-acre visibility
Acres don't see, people do. It appears that there are some public safety organizations here in town that already use FirstNet. So the question is, why do we need more FirstNet? When you speak about residential areas...
Mary, let me just stop you there. Do you want an answer to that question from Will right away, or are you just, these are concerns that you want to express?
Maybe you should decide whether he should answer.
Well, carry on and we'll see how it goes.
All right.
All right.
Couple more things. When you speak of a residential area, you're talking about people. And where the tower is located, whether or not it is residential or bordering an industrial zoning, you're talking about lots and lots of people who live there, who work there, and are exposed all the time. The one thing I heard that would justify, all right, more coverage or whatever, is some of these 10,000 people per hour who are driving through Manchester, their service gets a little wobbly. I would say wobbly, screwy. Poor them.
I vote Mary gets her own late night TV show. After the writers come back from their strike. Thank you, Mary. Robert, is that Robert? It's a little hard to read. Thank you, Robert.
Robert Leahy, Manchester. I want to thank the planning board and the select board for having this meeting and giving us an opportunity to hear this plan as well as comment on it. I appreciate your presentation, Will, and I appreciate Bill's thoughtful suggestions on alternative locations. I think those are very promising. I had a comment and one question and then a final comment. I know a few people kind of mentioned it about low income or immediate neighbors. You kind of glossed over the fact that the housing and the presumably vulnerable families who may actually be the tenants of your business partner, they may not be though, but you know that the tower violates the 300-foot setback in the fall zone. You noted that in your letter that there will be noise generated there every day, and you provide a report on the safety or the level of the noise. I just want you to reflect on the impact for that immediate neighborhood, because you glossed over that it was like it's close, it's adjacent to an industrial area, but it actually, there's houses there, people live there. And in that picture it showed, I believe one of those homes is like less than 300 feet from the tower, which is very close, like from me across to there. So can you reflect on
157 feet they admitted in their application.
That's my question.
Okay, that's the question.
Yeah,
question. Sure. So what I'll say is, first of all, AT&T does not seek out low-income areas to put towers. But what I will say is that they are at pains to find the right place and precisely not to discriminate. So many of the towers that we've been building really since 2018, some are on farms, right? Farms that are definitely seeing a lot of hard times. Others are on people who are quite well off, and they say, we want better service here, we want a tower here. So it's certainly not any type of programmatic.
I wasn't suggesting that you pick.
No, and I appreciate that. I just want to make that clear. What I would say is that, and I emphasized this before, is that what's going on in this particular property are multiple uses. There's residential, it's true. There's also an auto body shop. And trucks coming on and off of the property, dealing with the portalets and other cargo and things that are basically stored in that yard. So we are sensitive to that point, and we looked closely at multiple locations on the Dewar property, but the constraints that we're also running up again are those environmental constraints. We couldn't go further south than we went without ending up in the river corridor and having a potential effect there. Same with wetlands. So we hear what you're saying. Part of the issue, again, we are going to comply with the radio frequency emission standards, and those standards, really when it comes to a conventional cell tower, are something where we're orders of magnitude below where that safety threshold is. By reducing the height, we think we can make it more palatable and obviously make it shorter. To the extent that that fall zone was concerned about a tower collapse and not RF emissions, that's something else that we can look at. There's a way to design a tower with breakpoints in it so that, let's just suppose, hypothetically, right, a hurricane comes through Manchester. We've never thought about this 10 years ago, but now, realistically, it could happen, right? The idea is that the tower breaks onto itself, so it folds into the compound. It doesn't simply fall over. And that's something that we can certainly consider as part of the application.
And then I just had a comment. Thank you for addressing that. And I just say that, like that gentleman mentioned, I don't know if any of the people who live there are here. They may be disinclined to show up for whatever reasons personal. As far as the board and commission are concerned, I simply put this tower would violate 3 separate ordinances that we have on the books: the district being residential, the tower height, as well as the setbacks. We have to be aware of this precedent that would be set if we disregarded these ordinances moving forward. And then based on these issues alone, I think this should be rejected and the applicant should explore an alternative option. Bill mentioned several that I thought sounded reasonable. This isn't a choice between 140 feet or 100 feet. This is just a yes or no, and my recommendation on this project is no.
Thank you, Robert. Carl Bokel is online. Carl, can you hear me? And can you unmute yourself? And I hope we have audio.
I'm unmuted, yes.
We can hear you. Carry on.
I will keep it extremely brief. I have literally 2 words to say. The precautionary principle. My concern is not aesthetics, it's health. Personally, I'm not sensitive to electricity or electromagnetic, but I know that people like Mary are, and I think it's important, unless you're 100% sure that something is safe, to not allow it. The precautionary principle really is pertinent here in terms of allowing this to happen unless you're 100% sure. And I hate to say it, but I wish that government agencies had our back. I wish that they were concerned about our health. But the research I did on products like Roundup, which has glyphosate, the FDA says it's safe when we know it's not. So I don't go along with the guidelines from all the federal commissions. I think it's important for the Select Board and the Planning Commission to think themselves, is this actually safe to those people who are sensitive? And to use a precautionary principle to guide them. Thanks.
Thank you, Carl. And Jennifer French, would you like to speak? Are you here?
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to really be appreciative of this first net that we have already available to us. Everybody showed up this evening and giving consideration to our local community. I'm here to represent my brother, Richard French. He's a budding landowner, and he opposes this proposal. He makes a joke about how Johnny would always bring everybody from the residential area where they live, abutting my brother's property, to these meetings, because rarely were they in a position to make it themselves. And I guess maybe I should have taken Donnie's cue on that and done it myself so they could all represent. There was one point at the end of your talk, Will, I that said something, some government agency says we shouldn't consider zoning in a vacuum? That's a really tricky thing to tell some Vermonters. And I'm gonna go back and try to remember exactly what governing agency is saying that, because I know that when I mean, you go around and there's a lot of places where you would maybe consider that we've turned residential into industry, because we do our own industry, but that doesn't mean that we don't live there. So anyway, Richard French, abutting landowner, opposes, and thank you everybody for who's been speaking up for all the other issues.
Thank you, Jennifer and Sally Shaw. Are you here, Sally? There you are.
I am.
And we'll get you a microphone, and we're going to start the timer. But you've all been great, thank you, and we're on time.
I live at 49 Cottage Street. We've lived there for the past 67 years. We own the field, so we're abutters to this project, and we oppose the construction of the communications facility at 80 Side Road, and we ask the Select Board, the Planning Commission, and the Bennington County Regional Commission to formally express opposition to the project to the Vermont Public Utilities Commission. As a resident of Cottage Street and an abutter, I can testify that the tower would have a serious adverse visual impact affecting our property and views of the East Mountain and Downers Glen enjoyed by all residents of Cottage Street and visitors. I know that the applicants did not take photos or provide simulations of the visual impact of the tower on Cottage Street residents. The balloon test showed the tower would be visible and prominent, and since the wind was blowing to the south and east, and the string tethering the balloon was at a 45-degree angle when I went down to see exactly where it was coming from, one must assume that the tower would be taller and even more prominent than the balloon test indicated. And I have a picture that I took that I can share with the board, the two boards. As the applicants themselves acknowledge, the project would be in violation of the Manchester Land Use and Development Ordinance, the zoning bylaws, the Vermont Scenic Byways designation, Manchester's tower height regulations, and allowable proximity to homes. There is no way to move the tower, as the presenter said, further from the homes at the site without impacting jurisdictional Class 2 wetlands along the West Branch of Battenkill, as it is already sited within or very close to the 100-year flood zone. It would be an unfortunate and dangerous precedent for years of work of Manchester citizens who have volunteered on the Planning Commission over the years to be thrown out to benefit one multinational corporation and a single landowner. All towns have areas lacking cell phone coverage due to topography. Covering any gaps in cell phone coverage should be achieved without tossing out the town plan. If need is demonstrated, and I don't think it has been, alternative locations should be considered that don't violate the town plan, are closer to areas of need in the north and west areas of town. The Vermont Public Service Board drive test that was done just last July in 2022 showed Manchester to have robust cell phone and data coverage comparable to other larger cities in the state, like Burlington and Rutland. There is an existing cell tower just 4,000 feet to the northeast at a higher elevation. If the gaps in coverage can't be met by that tower, perhaps one should be located closer to the areas where there are gaps and in a less prominently visible location. We used to be content with a phone booth every 25 miles or so. Do we really now think that we need to have a cell tower every 4,000 feet?
And your time did expire, but I know you've painstakingly written this. And Will is going to follow.
I'm almost finished.
Okay, go ahead.
State law requires the Public Utilities Commission to give substantial deference to the town plans and bylaws, and we urge them to do so. A great deal is known about how non-ionizing and electromagnetic fields affect non-human species because we have been using animal and plant models in research going back to the 1930s to estimate impacts on human tissues. Yet no radio frequency emission guidelines today take non-human species into consideration, despite a constant measured rise in background levels that are capable of affecting wildlife and plants. I think our willful ignorance for the needs of the natural world while we indulge in data lust or chase our technological desires is silently damaging the human community. If we don't care about the unique physiology of the insects that pollinate our crops and their sensitivity to electromagnetic field radiation, nor the butterflies whose annual migration, aided by magnetic sensors in their antennae, delight our children, how can we really care about the people who share this community with us? Planning for the common good is difficult work, and our planners should be thanked for a very thankless and difficult effort. Their work should not be cast aside lightly.
Thank you, Sally. And Will?
So just a brief response on one point, because we do hear this point about the balloon not being accurate in terms of wind blowing and it being blown over. The technicians have an instrument that is certain that when the picture is taken, the balloon is 100% or 90-degree angle. So I just wanted to clear that up. I understand your other concerns.
It was a windy day.
Right, understood. And part of the reason that we need to do balloon tests when we do it, the way that we do it is to look for low wind conditions, precisely to avoid this issue of, well, the balloon's never on straight. So the technicians only will take a look, or only take a picture that we would include in our simulations when they're certain that it's in the right position.
Right, so this picture, which shows that the significant impact was taken when the wind was blowing at somewhere between 11 and 20 miles per hour, west, south, west.
Yeah, it's hard. I appreciate that, and I
So
understand.
it's going to be up here, it's not going to be down here. But I took a picture of the line, and I can show it to you at 45.
Well, again, what we would say is that if visibility is still a concern, and you accept our statement that we can reduce the height to reduce that visibility, we'd be willing to demonstrate that with a subsequent balloon test.
That's not the primary concern, it's throwing out our town plan to benefit.
I'm not, Sally, I'm not going to have people go back and forth. So, thank you though. We did, Audrey, are you still on Zoom? Because I noticed you had a direct question, but I don't know that I see you there. And I think that some of those may have been answered. Would you like to ask a question? Did you get all your questions answered? If you unmute and just say yes or no. I don't know if Audrey's actually still in the room. Okay. Are there any other questions if you didn't sign up? We have 3 people. Go ahead, Ed.
Fortunately, this is just a point of clarification. The 27 or 30 some odd acres in terms of visibility is from street view only, is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. So,
or, can I just clarify? I understand it, and you're raising a good point, and I'm not going to disagree with it. But it's basically from ground elevation of wherever you might be, so higher or lower.
I just wanted everybody to be aware of that aspect of things.
Listening to the arguments...
Will you tell, I think let's start with identifying yourself, please.
My name is Harold Baranowitz. My wife and I just moved up to the Manchester area about a year ago. Listening to all of the arguments today, there are basically 2 different sides. One side refers to the fact that we need additional cell coverage offset by the health and aesthetic concerns. I believe that the health and aesthetic concerns definitely outweigh the need for additional coverage. But one very important point that hasn't been considered is the fact that AT&T is going to sell the cell tower to a company, and that company is going to pay a substantial amount for the cell tower and will want to maximize revenues by doing whatever they want. And we don't know what they're going to do, and Manchester does not want to be in the position where they have to litigate against a well-established cell tower company and try to win a battle, because AT&T is going to wash their hands from the cell tower. Very simple, very simple. You don't know what you're going to be up against.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Will, I think any subsequent antenna that's put on the tower has to be permitted.
That's correct.
Okay, so I think it's, just to be clear, anything that goes back up, sorry, Will. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, yes, anything that would result in a height increase would have to come back before the planning commission and the select board.
So what you're saying is they can make it 100 feet, and 5 years from now, they can come back to the planning commission and get another 10 feet on there, or whatever they need.
If they can
President used to say, only take one cookie from the box.
Larry, I can't get off of our schedule and format because it's working so well. I think there was one other person that who wanted to ask a question.
My name is Tarsa Levick, and I'm a resident of Manchester. I'm also a Native American. My great-grandparents were full-bloods, all of them. And I just want to say that the precautionary principle, I think, would be wise for planners and people with power in the town to really pay attention to. And I've had 2 years of graduate level statistics. So the 37 people that were polled, I'm not sure I would put a whole lot of weight in that. I'm not sure there was a lot of clarity or anything, just in case anybody's thinking about doing that. And I'm really concerned about what happens as there's a progression of technology and we go from 3G to who knows what. Now, I'm a person who actually started as a child Green Up Day in my community in northern Vermont. So I really care about the animals, I care about the water, I care about people. And I personally gave the select board at the meeting we had many documents for you to review if you so desire to do that, that actually address health issues. So, and I think I read somewhere in all my research that there would be a possibility to have a second tower located next to this tower. In my digging, and I could be wrong about that, but I read that somewhere. So, I just want to say that precautionary principle when it comes to people and the earth and humanity is really welcomed by this town. I think we've made it really clear that we care about each other, and not just with words, but we're here tonight. And I want to thank all the people that are in positions of power for really keeping an open mind and an open heart. We don't need to become polarized if we are open and honest with ourselves and do our homework. I think that's really key. People here have all expressed that we have good reason not to trust government mandates. We've just come through 3 years of turmoil, and there's been a lot of division in this community, and I personally would like to see that stopped here and now. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think that covers the queue. Oh, Will, you wanted to address a little bit of that?
Yeah, just to clarify that there's no circumstance where there'd be a second tower in that compound or anywhere near it, because what the law says in Vermont is that once a tower is available, that others have to co-locate on it, and unless they can show that there's some reason to build a second one, but that would involve proving that it didn't have the structural capacity or that it wouldn't cause interference. And putting a tower directly next to an existing tower would cause interference, which is why you very seldom, except in unique circumstances, see two right together. So I think maybe what it was referring to was the fact that there could be different sets of antennas on a single tower. Just wanted to clarify that point.
Okay. At this point, and we're up against the time allotted, and I again want to thank you for being such a great audience, participants in the audience. It was excellent. I want to thank Will and Hunter for their presentations, and Ed and the Manchester Community Library for setting this up for us. We have the opportunity right now to issue a recommendation. It's been described to me as either a clean recommendation, a conditional recommendation, or a negative recommendation, which would go to the Public Utility Commission. We could also postpone it. That would probably, as I believe Scott and I were talking, would require another meeting that would be warned.
Yes.
And
soon.
Yeah, that would have to be soon. I will recommend at this point that we actually make a decision right now, and we can start. I recommend that we make a decision if that's what the planning board wants to do. So I'm going to put the ball in the planning board's court right now to see if they'd like to make a recommendation at this time. And we'll discuss. Sorry.
I think that based on everything we've heard, I would say that with respect to the current site, that we're making a negative recommendation.
Please hold your applause, so Phil.
That is conditioned on not just trying to run AT&T out on a rail, but to entertain alternative sites. So I think what we need to do is we need to go back, because there is obviously some kind of need, either at the public service, public health level, or at the coverage level. I don't think it's very definitive on what that is. I do think we need our public service, our Manchester Public Service folks to weigh in on this, on the FirstNet side. I think we need to hear from our police, our fire, our EMT services, specifically around FirstNet. As far as coverage goes, I think there are still a lot of unanswered questions as to coverage for the civilian subscribing population of AT&T. But I would say that I would make from the Planning Commission side, a negative recommendation pending the entertaining of other alternative sites where this might not have the same negative effects that have been voiced by folks from town tonight.
Okay. During that last few minutes, the select board was able to come to consensus, and we are formally expressing our opposition to construction, and we rejected and would like to explore alternate locations. And we also, I think, echo what Phil's concerns were. I think it's clear that everybody was on the same page, at least in this room, and I think outside, in and around town. And it's nice to have an informal hearing like this so that we can have an instant reaction on behalf of the constituents. That doesn't happen all the time. And it also doesn't happen with this much unanimity. So I believe that I will wait for Scott and for Will and Hunter and others who will direct us in what goes on next. But we've done our part tonight, and I once again thank you all for attending. And wait a minute, Tom, hold on.
While the two boards have voted against it, the PUC could still okay it.
Our purpose is just a recommendation, but they take it into consideration along with all of the issues that we've discussed tonight. And I think we will be getting more on this, and we'll be disseminating that as it arrives. So, yes, Bill.
How will that be communicated?
I will communicate it, or we will make sure. Yeah, I think, through both the public, I think there's per the, I don't want to say that, per the act or the 248A process, there is now a very specific set of actions that happen. And we are going to go into another, I believe we're going to have to possibly go through another hearing process. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I'll just state that what happens at this point is that AT&T has a decision to make of whether we think that we could work constructively and find another alternative site, alternative design. And if we do, that's great. We would basically restart this process with a new location. And if not, then we would file a petition, and then that will start a more formalistic and much more evidence-focused proceeding.
Okay, all right, so that's good to know.
Yep.
There are two outcomes. Did that answer your question? Were you able to hear that, Bill?
Well, I guess, we have this decision, we're aware of it, but how does the Public Service Board become formally aware that the town opposes the construction of this tower?
I believe I think we draft Scott drafts the letter, and it's submitted with the recommendation of the two boards.
Just like you did, Bill, that part of the packet.
Anyway, thank you all very much for attending, and we'll keep you informed. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn, Jan.
I'll second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Bill?
Ah, yes.
They've adjourned over there.
We don't even have